Welcome to the Sex Science Podcast, where we turn the latest peer-reviewed research on intimacy and sexuality into fun, accessible conversations. Generated by AI and fact-checked by experts, the Sex Science Podcast was created by LaShaw to empower you through knowledge. So, join us as we explore pleasure, relationships, human connection, and everything in between.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something really important and quite personal for many people.
We're looking into the journey of infertility, specifically for couples going through assisted reproductive technology.
Yeah, and the emotional side of that, the stress, the anxiety. We've actually got a really interesting 2024 study.
Right. It looks at how all these things, infertility itself, stress, anxiety, even social support, and maybe some societal beliefs kind of intersect for these couples.
Exactly. It's research from Rodriguez-Dominguez and their team, published in Psychology and Sexuality. So think of this as our deep dive into what the research says influences anxiety in this, very specific situation. So infertility itself, it's a pretty widespread challenge, isn't it? It affects a lot of people globally.
Oh, absolutely. Globally, we're talking, around 48.5 million couples? And the study we're focusing on is based in Spain. Just to give you a sense of scale, in Spain, data from a few years back, 2019, suggested over 600,000 women had, at some point, used assisted reproductive technology.
Wow, that's a significant number.
It is. And honestly, that's probably just scratching the surface.
Right, because not everyone who struggles to conceive actually seeks medical help for various reasons.
Exactly. So the true numbers could be, quite a bit higher.
Great. Okay, let's dive in then. So the study found that, a pretty noticeable chunk of the people they studied showed signs of anxiety.
Yeah, about a third, actually. 1 in 3, based on the scale they used, the Hospital Anxiety and Depression Scale.
1 in 3, that's quite high. Was there anything that stood out about who was feeling this anxiety?
Well, yes. And this is quite insightful, I think. There was a clear gender difference. The study showed women reported significantly higher levels of anxiety. We're talking nearly 38%, almost 4 in 10 women.
Wow.
For men, it was lower, around 22%. Still significant, 1 in 5, roughly, but noticeably lower than for women.
And does that line up with other research?
It does, generally speaking. A lot of previous studies have pointed to a greater psychological burden on women during this process.
But it's important not to forget the men, right? The study mentioned that too.
Absolutely crucial point. The researchers were careful to emphasize that men facing infertility also experience considerable distress. It's not that they don't struggle.
It's just that the reported anxiety levels were higher among the women in this particular sample.
Right, almost double, in fact, which, it really speaks volumes about the societal pressures, the emotional weight that often falls disproportionately on women during the infertility journey.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the study looked into why. They explored different stressors using something called the Fertility Problem Inventory.
That's right, the FPI. It breaks down infertility-related stress into 5 main areas, sort of domains of concern.
Okay, what are they?
So first, there's social concern. That's about how you feel in social situations, talk about infertility, that kind of thing.
Got it.
Then sexual concern, which focuses on, the impact on intimacy, the pressures of timed intercourse, maybe. Third is relationship concern, how infertility affects the couple's dynamic communication, things like that.
Okay.
And the last 2 are a bit different. Need for parenthood, which is simply the strength of the desire to have kids.
Right.
And rejection of a child-free lifestyle, meaning how negatively someone views the idea of not having children.
Okay, 5 areas. And which of these did the study find were actually linked to higher anxiety?
So they found direct links for 3 of them. Higher anxiety was associated with greater social concern,
Okay.
greater sexual concern, and greater relationship concern.
Interesting.
And also, interestingly, younger age was linked to higher anxiety as well.
So those first 3 social, sexual, relationship concerns, those seem to be the heavy hitters when it comes to anxiety in this context.
Exactly. And this wasn't entirely out of the blue. It does back up findings from some previous studies that also found these connections.
Let's dig into those a bit more. Social concern. What does that really look like for someone?
Well, it's not just abstract sadness. It's feeling really sensitive or awkward when the topic comes up. Maybe avoiding baby showers or family gatherings.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's that feeling of being, judged or maybe just fundamentally misunderstood by friends or family who haven't been through it. Social isolation can be a big part of it, too.
Right, feeling like an outsider. And sexual concern, you touched on it, but can you elaborate?
Sure, it can manifest as actual sexual problems developing during this stressful time, or maybe just a noticeable drop in pleasure or desire.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the whole aspect of sex becoming scheduled or performance-oriented because of treatment cycles that can really, take a toll on intimacy.
Definitely takes the spontaneity out of it, I'd imagine.
Absolutely. And that pressure can create a lot of tension.
Okay. And relationship concern.
This is about the strain infertility puts on the partnership itself. Difficulty talking about it openly, maybe differences in how each partner is coping.
Yeah, men and women often cope differently.
Right, they often do. And that can lead to misunderstandings or friction if it's not navigated carefully.
Yeah.
So relationship concern captures that stress within the couple.
Got it. Now, you mentioned the other two factors, need for parenthood and rejection of a child-free lifestyle, didn't have that direct link to anxiety in this study. Any thoughts on why that might be?
Yeah, this is where it gets quite interesting. The researchers brought up an alternative way of thinking about it.
Okay.
Some models suggest we should maybe distinguish between the stress that impacts, tangible, concrete areas of your life, your social interactions, your sex life, your relationship.
Right, the day-to-day stuff.
Exactly. Distinguish that from the more sort of abstract beliefs or desires, like how much you want to be a parent or how you feel about not being one.
Oh, okay.
And in this study, it seems like the anxiety was more strongly predicted by the stress impacting those concrete life areas, rather than the strength of the desire itself.
That makes a certain kind of sense. The immediate pressures feel more, immediately stressful.
Precisely. It's the here and now impact that seems to be driving the anxiety symptoms more directly.
The study also mentioned indirect effects. Can you explain that concept?
Sure. Think of it like a chain reaction. Something might not directly cause anxiety itself, but it increases something else that then leads to anxiety.
Like a domino effect.
Exactly. So the study looked at a couple of these indirect pathways. One involved gender.
Okay, how so?
Well, they found that being a woman didn't directly cause higher anxiety in their model, but it was linked to experiencing higher levels of social concern, sexual concern, and relationship concern.
Ah, I see.
And those higher concerns, as we just discussed, were directly linked to higher anxiety.
So being female sort of opened the door to experiencing more of the specific stressors that then led to anxiety.
That's a good way to put it. It acts like a pathway. And this really resonates with, the societal narratives around women and motherhood. Motherhood is often framed as this natural instinct, a core part of female identity.
Right, the expectation.
Exactly. So infertility can then trigger feelings of guilt, inadequacy, or failing to meet that societal expectation, which likely fuels those social and relationship concerns.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not just a personal desire, but a societal role, too.
It absolutely is. And though we focused on women's higher reported anxiety, it's worth remembering men also face stigma, often related to fulfilling that traditional male role of father and provider.
Good point. What about the other indirect effect? You mentioned social support.
Yes. Lower perceived social support was also indirectly linked to higher anxiety.
How did that pathway work?
In this case, feeling less supported was linked to experiencing more sexual concern and more relationship concern.
Okay.
And again, those higher levels of sexual and relationship concern were then linked to higher anxiety.
So feeling alone in it amplifies the stress in those intimate areas?
It seems so. Social support is generally a huge protective factor for mental health, a buffer against stress. But, and this is the really tough part with infertility, the stigma surrounding it can make people hesitant to even seek support. Or maybe the support they get isn't helpful or feels judgmental.
Right. So the very thing that could help is harder to access because of the nature of the problem.
Precisely. It can become a bit of a vicious cycle.
Okay, one more area that the study looked at was sexist beliefs. They used terms like hostile and benevolent sexism. Can you quickly define those?
Hostile sexism, probably what most people think of. It's the overt, negative, often misogynistic attitudes towards women who challenge traditional roles.
Okay, the obvious kind.
Right. Benevolent sexism is trickier. It sounds positive on the surface, like putting women on a pedestal, seeing them as needing protection, being naturally more nurturing.
But it's still limiting.
Exactly. It still reinforces traditional, often restrictive, gender roles and stereotypes, implying women are maybe less capable in other areas or belong primarily in the domestic sphere.
Got it. So how did these sexist beliefs connect to anxiety in this study?
Well, this was another interesting finding. In this specific study, holding stronger sexist beliefs, either hostile or benevolent, was not directly linked to having more anxiety symptoms.
Oh, really? No direct or indirect link?
Not according to their analysis, no. However, they did find some other interesting connections.
Like what?
Higher hostile sexism was associated with having greater relationship concerns.
Okay. So more negative views of women challenging roles linked to more relationship stress during infertility.
Potentially, yes. And higher benevolent sexism, that seemingly positive kind, was associated with having a stronger need for parenthood and a greater rejection of a child-free lifestyle.
So viewing women in that traditional, nurturing, focused way was linked to placing more importance on becoming parents.
That seems to be the connection they found. It suggests that while these beliefs might not directly fuel anxiety in this context, they do seem to shape how people experience other aspects of infertility.
Can you speculate why? Why would hostile sexism link to relationship concerns?
Well, the researchers suggest that people holding more traditional or rigid gender views might experience more relationship tension when infertility disrupts those expected roles.
Like feeling like they or their partner are failing to fulfill the man's role or the woman's role.
Exactly. It could create conflict or stress if reality doesn't match those ingrained beliefs about gender roles, especially around parenthood.
And the benevolent sexism linking to the stronger need for parenthood.
That could be because benevolent sexism often emphasizes the centrality of family and nurturing roles for women, and perhaps by extension, for men as protectors and providers within that family structure.
So it reinforces the idea that parenthood is sort of the ultimate fulfillment, making the lack of it feel more significant.
That's a plausible interpretation, yes. It might amplify the perceived importance and societal pressure associated with becoming parents.
Okay, so to wrap up our focused discussion on this Spanish study, what are the main takeaways about anxiety and assisted reproductive technology?
I think the key points are, first, anxiety is definitely a common experience for a significant portion of people going through assisted reproductive technology. Second, women, in this sample reported higher anxiety, and this seems linked indirectly to experiencing greater social, sexual, and relationship concerns.
Right.
Third, feeling like you have less social support also makes you more vulnerable to anxiety, again, through increasing those sexual and relationship worries.
Okay.
And finally, while sexist beliefs weren't directly tied to anxiety here, they do seem to play a role in shaping relationship dynamics and how central parenthood feels to individuals.
It really paints a picture of how complex this experience is. It's so much more than just a medical procedure.
Oh, absolutely. It's deeply intertwined with social pressures, relationship dynamics, personal identity, societal expectations, the whole package.
Which really highlights why understanding these psychosocial factors is so important, doesn't it? Both for research and for how we actually support people.
Definitely. We need approaches that acknowledge and address these specific stressors, the social isolation, the strain on intimacy, the relationship challenges.
So maybe final thought for you listening. Thinking about these findings, how could we as a society maybe adjust our attitudes or improve our support systems?
Yeah, how can we better target the specific stressors that this study highlights, the social, sexual, and relationship concerns?
And what part does thinking about and maybe even challenging some of those traditional gender roles play in potentially easing some of this burden?
It's a big question, but definitely something worth reflecting on. How can we create a more supportive environment for everyone navigating the often difficult path of assisted reproductive technology?
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us for this focused deep dive.
Thank you for listening to the Sex Science Podcast brought to you by LaShaw. We hope that you learned something new about the wonderful world of human intimacy and sexuality, and join us next time as we dive into more fascinating research. And remember, science is for you. Music for this podcast was produced by SOUNDRAW.